And where we've got to now is we've run out of road. And so the extraction that bring wealth to the few for that short blip of time on Earth time, 500 years isn't very long, looked like that could underpin a system that could go on forever. But you've even got to the point that 90% of the big fish have gone from the ocean. You've taken out so much that you've run out of road. So I think we went wrong in thinking that that was a system that could last, because we didn't understand that the resources on Earth were finite. And if you don't mind me saying it, I think people have got caught up in a Wetiko psychosis, that you just destroy the ecosystem that keeps you alive to get as much as you possibly can in the short term without thinking what's going to happen to the generations ahead or to anybody else in that ecosystem, any other living creature.
Welcome to Everlutionary, a podcast about how we can heal and transform with the world. Every episode of my show, we explore conversations around philosophy, science, mysticism, social justice, how we can be change catalysts and activators and mobilize each other to create a world free of violence. I'm your host, Hawah Kasat. Hello, Cindy. Welcome to the Everlutionary Podcast. It is an honor to have you join the show. How are you doing today? Tell us what's on your heart.
It's a delight to you, Hawah, and to be on this show. I mean, it's very troubling times, but it always feels better when we reach out and we find communities of people who care and who want our world to be a brighter place. So I'm feeling very good about being here today.
Yeah, and I'm excited to just have you lining up in this thread of episodes that I've been doing around global planetary healing and the environment. You have been spending your whole career working on educating people around the planet, and your work is inspiring. But what has inspired your work?
Yeah, well, thanks. That's a really great question. I mean, I consider myself a really privileged person. People might find that surprising, considering I'm born at a time when there was so much prejudice against Black people, against people of mixed heritage like myself, when there were so many struggles really happening in the world. But I think that was a real time of great inspiration. My parents came out of the civil rights movement, and my mother's a very strong environmentalist. I took part when I was a student and I was a teenager in a lot of the anti-apartheid work and apartheid protests and movements in London. And it just connected you with such incredible people whose voices were so powerful. They just traveled across continents and across time. And they gave you a kind of light, if you like. I mean, I'm talking about people like obviously Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro. They were just absolutely incredible leaders in the era when I just shortly before I was born, or as I was growing up. And they were people who really stood for something and who could transmit these powerful messages into your soul. And another part of that really was the music as well of the time and from before. I think there's a whole heritage of music from the Black diaspora that carries in tremendous power. And that was all around me growing up too. So I think I had incredible inspiration to know that there's just something much bigger than the corporate machinery that a lot of young people have funneled into and told that's where they belong. I think the voices that I heard, the music I heard, the spirits that I was connected to, including nature, very much so, were telling us you're connected to something much bigger than this, and you must work towards being somebody that lives in balance with the greater spirit of Earth rather than with the tiny little small and quite often petty spirits that get into positions of leadership through our human political system.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear that you grew up. So you were born in the United States?
No, I was born in London and my father is Guyanese, but that was a very powerful movement because at the time that the civil rights movement was happening, that was the time that a lot of the former British colonies were gaining their independence. And so the struggle was really one and the same, because that was a time that people believed that they could throw off that yoke and build countries on a much more equitable basis for the colonized people. But it was still a huge struggle because the imprint of segregation, of white supremacy, was very much how the empire was constructed, and those things had to be overthrown. I mean, I think probably the most prominent example of that is what happened to Patrice Lumumba in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And there was a brilliant young leader who rose up to lead on democratic principles, but he was kind of a cartel, if you like, of the US, the UK, and the UN to an extent that dismantled his power and put in the puppet in place that was Mobutu, Sese Mobutu, and eventually they had Lumumba assassinated. And that happened, very similar things happened in Guyana, happened across the Caribbean islands, happened across Central and South America. So the civil rights movement, what was happening in America, was very much an inspiration and a source of great demonstrations of huge courage to overcome that systemic type of progression and keep walking. So it just went right across the world in the communities that were also in the struggle for recognition as full humans and for autonomy and independence.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought in the music earlier, because when I think of the civil rights movement, I think of music. I think of the songs that pulled people together and brought people together in the streets, the hope that is elicited, the ways that music becomes the glue to our shared humanity, right? We can all sing songs, and those songs then they travel far. They dance on the wind and they travel across the world, and they inspire other mass movements of people that are inspired by those songs, that know those songs create a meaning that's deeper than what is just on the surface. There's a deeper meaning in terms of how our spirits are moved when we are called to justice and we're called into acting for something that's greater than just ourselves. So explain to us, what is Planetary and why were you driven to launch it?
Well, thanks very much, Howard. So Planetary is, as you said, it's an organization that's pioneering. There's other wonderful people out there doing very similar work. So we're trying to find out who we are and work together, but it's pioneering Earth-led education. Now, beautiful as it may be, that isn't about teaching children to hug trees, but it's really about equipping children to move from an egocentric worldview, which has dominated education really since post-industrial revolution, to an ecocentric worldview. So no matter what you want to be, whether it's a hairdresser, an astrophysicist, an architect, a filmmaker, you do it understanding the limits of our planetary boundaries. So it doesn't really change hugely the subjects that we learn, but it changes how we apply what we learn. So you know that you do not do things in a way that damages Mother Earth, that damages the life support system that keeps us alive. So there's the content that is designed to enable children to learn whatever it is within these planetary boundaries, but there's also a whole different imaginative field, if you like, an ecology of enabling us to see ourselves as an ecosystem species, stewards of planet Earth, rather than being driven by these dreams of domination, destruction, and downfall. That really, that's what we're taught. We're taught a history that is all often about conquest. If you look at children's games, they're often about beating somebody else. If you look at the competition in the school system, it's get ahead as fast as you can so that you can be the one that gets to the top at the expense of everybody else, whether that's explicit or implicit. A lot of the stories and narratives that we hear are around that. So the Earth-led education is enabling children to understand Earth systemically and work within those systems. And it's also creating an ecology, if you like, of imagination that give us this ability to be creators and stewards as opposed to dominators and destroyers.
Yeah. So Earth-led education as opposed to what-led education? How would you describe the education that we receive today, like in our schools? What is the education like today, and how is Earth-led education? I mean, I understand that it's more of an interconnected way that we understand our relationship with the earth, but how is education today missing the mark?
Well, I think, first of all, I really want to honour so many teachers out there. I think there's absolutely brilliant teachers. I encounter them daily, and I'm so impressed with the work that they do and the heart and the care that they have for the children that they steward. So there's no criticism of teachers, in my view, whatsoever. I think that so many teachers are called to do work that is a caring, nurturing, profession, and then they're stuck because they have to go in a system that puts them under so much pressure that is slightly inhumane in itself, and they have a curriculum which excludes some of the things that they would like to bring in. So there's a distinction between the education system and the teachers. I think a lot of the education system was designed post-industrial revolution. So it was designed to get people to be component parts of a machine. The industrial revolution, may have served some people well at the time, but the idea really behind it is entirely extractive. You extract the maximum that you can, you profitize it, you take, really, you make, and then you throw away because you need more stuff to find more people to buy the stuff, to throw it out. So you're going to have some people that will make a lot of money out of doing that, and there'll be the tiny percentage at the top, but you need an awful lot of drones to put into the machines to create the stuff. And I think really we're still in that model. We learn at school, you don't learn a whole story of the human family, which is becoming ever more critical now if we're to find solutions together for how to be a successful species on planet Earth, because it's not Earth that's going to collapse, it's us. We have to learn a holistic story of who humans are, of how we got here, of how we can make different choices going forward. Not these very often patriotic narratives that we learn to pit one nation against another, to make you feel superior because you come from America, or because you come from Britain, because you come from whichever country it is. And also to learn how to do whatever it is we learn how to do in balance with nature. What made me feel that this was incredibly important was I often working with adults at board level, looking at how to make their companies more sustainable or their systems more sustainable, and they had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. So you're having to do all this unlearning at 35, at 40, at 55 years old, and that's too late. We can't have another generation of humans who think that it's okay to build businesses when the death of Earth, as Kate Raworth, the brilliant economist, puts it, is an economic externality. When you're designing your systems, or whether it's making iPhones, whether it's making chocolate, whether it's making cars, or when all the resources that you're going to need are coming at the expense of the collapse of our natural ecosystems. And often, to use the example of tech, there's a semiconductor in there called coltan, which is now one of the most sought after minerals on Earth. That's fueling the wars in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this is learning to think systemically. That you wouldn't think, what has an iPhone got to do with a gorilla? But because not only is the land being laid waste to because of the wars over to control the coltan mines, but when you're deep in the jungle and you're in the war zones, the only thing to eat are the lowland gorillas. So it's decimating the gorilla population. I remember standing in a boardroom and trying to explain this, and a wonderful woman who'd come from working in the DRC on the lowland gorilla, they were just looking at her as if she'd fallen off another planet and couldn't understand these interconnections. And so you carry on designing more and more and more, even creating the desire for people to have more stuff that you can throw away is part of that problem. So we'll always have technology. It can be fantastic. We'll always need food. We always need transport. We'll always need energy. But we need to learn how to design those systems in ways that are regenerative rather than in ways that are destructive. And that's the heart of Earthled Education, where it puts the life support system that keeps you alive at the heart of what you learn, as opposed to thinking that you're superior to it and you can somehow use it as a set of raw materials. And also it puts life at the heart of how you learn. A human being should never be treated as a commodity that can be reduced to the cheapest possible component on a balance sheet. Most of what we consume today is cheap because somebody's paying for it with their life. And that is not a way to design a system that respects the soul of Earth or the soul of a person. And you have to do so much shutting down and disconnecting to put that pair of shoes on or that coat on or drive that car. You have to disconnect because you can't possibly think about the destruction that was caused to another human being and the suffering for you to be able to wear it, drive it, eat it. And those are the things that we have to be more conscious of. And in doing that, we will design things in a way that are much more fulfilling to ourselves and will create abundance in our food systems, in our social systems. And people are terrified of that concept. But that's how the story is told. You're taught to fear anything that asks you to think about that and make those changes, rather than to envisage a much brighter world that we could have if we could just let that old model go and step into a very different way of being humans on this planet.
Right. I love that you are beginning this conversation with education, because I think so many of us are just yearning for a solution. And sometimes in the urgency of what is before us, when we see the ways that the oceans and the Amazon and ecosystems are collapsing, as we hear the stories of the sixth mass extinction, there seems like there's this deep urgency, like if we don't act in this moment, that it's all just going to be lost. And yes, there is an important reason to consider the urgency always. And when I think about education, I think about planning for generations in the future, right? If we can teach children interconnectedness, which is a word you said earlier, the interconnectedness of our beings with the earth, if we can instill that value, if we can instill that way of being in right relationship, then the solutions will follow, because the value for cherishing, for holding, and for honoring the incredible gift that is nature, that in and of itself will change the way these young people show up and build their businesses and lead these Fortune 500 companies, right? Because sooner or later, the old guard will retire, will slowly fade away, and the newer generation will come and begin to steward these systems and ideally recreate and revolutionize these systems. You also said earlier, the superior and the inferior. When I think of education, I was a high school teacher when I started right out of college. I was building a peaceable schools program, doing work around education, social emotional learning. A lot of my work in the classroom was combating this idea that children are numbers or percentages. You're a 95%, you're a 63%, you're a D, you're a B, because each person is uniquely their own being that is valued in a way that's quite unique to their life. And sometimes we can almost dehumanize our children through education. And one of my professors, Coleman McCarthy, used to say, there's academic violence that takes place within the classroom. But when you talk about Earthled education, I think about those years I spent in the classroom. And I appreciate you lifting us teachers up as well, because a lot of us teachers, we're out here trying to do the right thing and to create holistic thinking. And yet we're face to face with a system that is not designed to allow us to bring out those parts of a young person through education, right? Education is meant to churn out and to manufacture these cogs in a wheel. And so I'm imagining Earthled education is trying to do something separate or different. It's trying to create a responsibility, a critical sort of awareness, a provocative curiosity around the ways that we engage in the world. Are you, with your work, are you providing this curriculum to other teachers? How are you able to engage in the ways that these systems are actually operating?
Thanks for that. It's a very good question. I mean, I just want to go back a tiny bit just to say, though, we're a 300,000-year-old species, which is pretty young, considering most species on Earth get about 1 million years. Mammals, mammalian species, we're 300,000. For most part of it, we haven't lived like this. So it's one of the things that's so powerful in this dominant cultural narrative is that this is the only system. But until very recently, take America. America's been under this system for 300-400 years, 500 at the most. Let's give it 500 years from the arrival of the conquistadores, a little bit more. I mean, I think it's really shocking when you look at the environmental deterioration of America in that tiny, tiny period of time. It just shows it's not at all necessary. It's a catastrophe, really, that you had stewardship of that land and not fully, because, people fought hard to retain their sovereignty, their nations. You've had it for that tiny period of time and you've totally trashed it. If you'd given a child a toy or a flat or, an adolescent a flat and they'd done that, in that time, they'd say, there's something wrong with the way that you think. There's something wrong the way that you've been brought up and the way you think. But we're carrying on putting these people in power who are saying, this is how it is, this is what we need to do. I mean, that's absolutely nuts. It's clear that if you've trashed your planet or you've trashed your thing that was running very, very well for 300,000 years, and there's different forms of governance, there's different forms of self-organization, there was nothing that brought it to the edge of systemic Earth systems collapse. So why are we ceding power to people that are teaching our children to do that to the natural systems that keep them alive? And I think before I talk about what we're doing, I think we have to, in a way, take hope from that. There's a beautiful First Nations professor called Dr. Layla June, who has a short video which you can find called How Humans Regenerate Earth. And she says that I invite you to remember that we were an anchor ecosystem species. We knew how to do it. It's not a stretch of the imagination to think that we can do it. It's a memory. We did it. That's how we lived.
What is an anchor?
An anchor ecosystem species. So it's the species on which all the other life forms in the ecosystems depend. And we were so smart that we knew that, like whales are in nature, but that can go right down because their poo fertilizes the phytoplankton, which enables photosynthesis to happen. So you take the whales out, you take out the poo, you take out the things that enabling the phytoplankton to photosynthesize, which is a base component of life on Earth. But we were incredibly smart and we knew that we had to keep the most thriving ecosystem around us, because I'm not saying all humans were doing it all over the planet, but a lot were. We knew that the healthier our ecosystem was, the better our life was. And so we did everything we could to keep the areas that we had dominion over, or we had stewardship over, I should say, in the best possible condition.
Well, so what happened? I'm so curious because we have this narrative in this story. And I love that you're calling that in right now, that this is not the history of humanity. This is actually the last 500, 700, 800 years where we've really fallen off the ledge and lost complete respect and basically just trashed the planet, right? I mean, we've just trashed it. But that's not the story. That's not the long arc of humanity. There's a 300,000 year history where that wasn't the case. What did happen? Where did we go wrong?
Well, I think that does come back to colonization. I know you want to ask me about Planetary, but I think it really does. And without saying, oh, everybody was evil and they were horrid and they set out to do this deliberately, some of it has just been done in ignorance. I think when colonization starts, you've got a Europe that's in tatters. It's tried to go out and grab resources during the Crusades. It's gone off to the Middle East and had a good old battle to dominate land there, but they've exhausted themselves with the wars that ensued. You have got a very greedy class of people who've put in what they call the enclosure laws. And so the peasantry, the ordinary people in Britain are now living, or in Europe are living in abject poverty. You've got a belief system where one set of humans are far superior than another, and they have to display their wealth in huge palaces and fabulous clothing. And all of this costs a heck of a lot of money. So you set off to conquer new lands so that you can extract the resources from there, so that you can carry on with this belief system. The mighty are the ones who control the most and who have these huge, not just small displays of wealth, but that aristocratic system. The palaces that you see, the biggest possible manifestation of that is Versailles. Can you imagine the millions? And it wasn't just the actual buildings, but it was the clothing, the jewels, the lavishness. Everything becomes these huge displays which addict people to wealth. And the only way that you can maintain that is by going off to the New World. And then that's when you start the conquistadores, go off with the blessing of the Pope. They meet a completely different belief system. They're greeted as friends, as wonderful beings that have come, and all they're thinking is, my God, the letters, you can read the letters that Columbus sends back. He says, these are the most gentle people. They're living like this. They're sophisticated. They know how to navigate things, and I'm going to take the lot. He actually puts it in the letter. I can get this for you. And that's what happens. And because the world looked like it was relatively big at the time, it sets off this process of extracting as much as you can by domination and force. But you don't realize, as you just said with the First Nations people who saw this happening and they said, Jesus, these people must be mad. This is why I mentioned Professor Jack D. Forbes. He records it in his book, Columbus and Other Cannibals, that they were so shocked when they saw that. They thought, what is wrong with a type of mentality that can destroy the ecosystem that keeps it alive? This must be an incredibly deep psychosis. And they called it the Wetiko Psychosis, where you would destroy for greed and for power. And they said it's highly contagious, it's clearly going to take our world, and it will take the rest of it over a period of time. And because the world looks huge to the colonizers, 80% of countries on Earth by 1914 had been colonized by about 7 European powers. It looks like you could go on doing this forever. But the First Nation people could see, and this is going to run out. You are going to run out of road. And where we've got to now is we've run out of road. And so the extraction that bring wealth to the few for that short blip of time on Earth time, 500 years isn't very long, looked like that could underpin a system that could go on forever. But you've even got to the point that 90% of the big fish have gone from the ocean. You've taken out so much that you've run out of road. So I think we went wrong in thinking that that was a system that could last, because we didn't understand that the resources on Earth were finite. And if you don't mind me saying it, I think people have got caught up in a Wetiko psychosis, that you just destroy the ecosystem that keeps you alive to get as much as you possibly can in the short term without thinking what's going to happen to the generations ahead or to anybody else in that ecosystem, any other living creature. But now, even people with considerable amounts of wealth are having to live on planets that are burning. Look at what happened in Los Angeles, or flooding, Miami, Florida. Places that are wealthy for many are being whacked as hard as anywhere else. We are a connected planet. You cannot behave like that. And if you trash the ecosystem that keeps you alive, you are destroying your ability to have a sustainable future. You have to now relearn and go back to ways that are regenerative. That doesn't mean that we go back to living in, people will say, primitive, which I don't think that they were, but we've got incredible technology. We know how to design living buildings. We know how to do all these amazing things. So we just use this mistake that we've made as an impetus to use all our ingenuity to design systems that are regenerative, food, energy, transport, how we design our cities, instead of extractive and destructive.
First of all, I love that you just said, use this mistake that we've made to redesign, to relearn, to unlearn, and then to relaunch our systems, right? I mean, this is an opportune moment, but that requires a couple things, right, Cindy? It requires humility. I mean, the idea of conquest and extracting, the amount of extraction that has driven certain pockets of humanity who, as you just said, if I can quote you, are addicted to wealth. That addiction to wealth has caused utter disregard for the planet and for also people, but also for other species on the planet. There's this sense that like humans are more superior, we're greater than, we're more valuable than the whales or the dolphins or the gorillas or the squirrels or the birds. And because of that mentality, it makes me pause because, and again, back to education, I do think it starts really young. I think it starts right when you're born. It starts when you're 3, when you're 5. It's instilling this value of being with nature in a way that's not looking at it as something that we own or something that we conquest or something that is colonized, but something that we are in deep relationship with. And it's symbiotic relationship. And it's not rocket science, actually. That's the crazy thing. This is not rocket science, but it is the human nature that I'm just so curious about. It's like we are, not we as in all of us, because I love that you've pointed to First Nation people. There's Indigenous people around the world for thousands of years who lived in really balanced harmony with the nature, with the world around them, with stewarding ecosystems. But then there's this moment in time when it all just came crashing down. And this is what has led us to this moment right now where we have to clean up the mess. And part of cleaning up the mess is cleaning up our own minds and our own hearts. And how do we do that? How do we clean the gook that has us manufacturing stories that aren't even real stories. And I heard you speak about this before, Cindy, and I'd love to connect with you on this a little bit because there is a story. It's a one-sided story that we're telling ourselves about humanity. And that one-sided story, I think, keeps us trapped within these cycles of extraction and conquest and greed. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see storytelling as a part of unraveling this quagmire of human struggle right now?
Thank you, Hannah. I think it is a crisis of the spirit, really. I think that's what it is. I mean, when I say addiction to wealth, it's just stuff. I should probably say addiction to stuff, because that's just wealth in one interpretation of what wealth is. I mean, we all want our basic needs. We want heat, we want warmth, we want food, we want comfort, we want love. But you get to a point that how much do you need? But this just becomes an addiction to stuff, which is somebody's idea of wealth. It's not really how many people see or believe. There's value in so many other domains. But that's when you come back to the story, where the recent dominant cultural narrative, it doesn't measure the worth of somebody's spirit. It measures their worth in terms of how much they earn, how big their house is, and how much stuff they have, which when you look at it in the abstract is utterly absurd. That person that sits there with this pile of stuff that has been extracted at probably the expense of a lot of people's own well-being, and certainly of the planet, that person is now considered more wise and more valuable because the thing that they had was the ability to work out how to get loads of stuff, when often that meant being really quite brutal and horrid to other people and other life forms. I'm just speaking in the abstract, because that's if you look at all the great books, the main religions and the main philosophies, that goes against every single tenet in there. But they've twisted the story so much that you believe that that's a valid way of living. And I think that if you had it, and I've spoken about First Nations people and Indigenous people, but there's loads of people that didn't grow up in First Nations and Indigenous cultures who don't want to live like that either, who strive to live in other ways. And it doesn't mean that you go around wearing a hemp shirt and sandals and all the negative stereotypes that are thrown onto people, and that's deliberate storytelling as well, that they're somehow nuts, there's something wrong with them, there's something, you're stupid if you see them, you don't want to be like them at school, that's dropping out, and all the pejoratives that are put on that. So it does come down to the stories that we're told from our earliest. I wouldn't say so much. There's a dominant cultural narrative now that having lots of stuff makes you a better person, makes you cleverer. This worship of billionaires just because they've had the ruthlessness to go out, or the luck sometimes. They're now the wiser humans. Why are they gurus? So I think it is really important, but there's billions and billions and billions of dollars thrown into that kind of storytelling because you keep people, and they're often quite appeal to basic instincts, real exploitation of people and violence, and people are addicted to that storytelling. And there's billions of dollars spent addicting people to that type of story. So I think if we're able to recognize that, try to put out a different type of narrative. And the earlier we can reach our children, because I think our children do land eco-literate and they are receptive. Children love nature. They tend to be kind. They tend to want to do nice things and share. And then they're funneled into this system that you described that says you're preparing you to go and be that cog in the machine. You might be the winner cog or you might be a lower down cog. But I think it really is important to tell stories that allow us to really redefine and genuinely redefine our relationship with Earth, and to let our spirits be healthful, and to clean up this 500, 600, 700 year story of dominate, repress, take, which we're seeing coming again. We thought that the world order was that you didn't take people's lands by force now. I mean, there's all other economic ways of doing it, but now we have somebody in power who's rattling the saber to go and take over other people's countries for their mineral wealth or for their whatever. But I definitely think that it's hard. However, when you were asking me, how do we do this work, it's extremely hard because you're seen as a dangerous element, really. If you write a nice book and that can go out and sell some copies, which some of my books do, but if you go out and actually say, we're here to try to remodel, how our children, then you become dangerous and the system doesn't have a place for you. And you can work with individual teachers who want to bring that into the classroom. But at a systemic level, that's not a story that is good for the economy in its current form. And so it's much harder to get through because people are still wedded to this old economic model, which is very much fueling our demise. As long as we live in an economy that's based on extracting to extinction, and making things as cheaply as possible to sell to as many possible people, then you've got to get the population to grow all the time, and you've got to get the GDP to grow. Everything is based on this growth, which is entirely unsustainable. But to remodel it is work that's too deep often for people to be able to entertain that it might be able to happen.
Hey friends, I'm taking a quick break from this conversation because I wanted to let you know that this episode is part of a series that I've been doing that has been covering environmental sustainability and climate change. If you haven't already, I encourage you to go back and listen to previous episodes. The one before this, we're decolonizing Earth Day and exploring the concepts of Pachamama and Gaia. And previous to that episode, you will find a powerful message on saving the Amazon rainforest with Prince Haru of the Kuntanawa Nation. And also, there's an episode on conscious capitalism and the environmental impacts of the fast fashion industry. If you've been finding benefit from listening, then take a moment and on your podcast app, rate this show. Or give it a thumbs up if you're listening on YouTube. Even more importantly, take a couple of minutes and write a review. This really helps to make Everlutionary more visible in search engines. You know what also helps? Text this episode to a few friends or colleagues. Hit the subscribe button and download episodes so you can listen to them anytime and anywhere. If you turn notifications on, then you will get an alert when I release a new episode. I put out a new show every 2 weeks. And also, if you're finding value and worth, then become a paid subscriber. You can support monthly or yearly. I want to keep doing this show, but I also need to make it more sustainable. You can become a patron of Everlutionary by becoming a subscriber on my Substack podcast page. And finally, you can find opportunities to deepen your learning and train with me through my in-person retreats and programs. I have multiple programs coming up, including a silent meditation retreat in Massachusetts and a summer camp for yogis happening at Roots to Sky Sanctuary, located in the Appalachian Mountains, about 3 hours from Washington, D.C. All of this can be found from the links in the show notes. And now, back to the magic. Yeah, it's too deep to wrap our heads around, and it feels probably very overwhelming to consider what those solutions are, especially for listeners that are sitting in their car right now and driving home from work and listening to this podcast. And it's like, it can feel overwhelming. I think many people that do care deeply about what's happening right now on the planet, to the planet, between ourselves as humans, I think there's a sense of overwhelming burnout. Planetary burnout was the topic of one of my previous episodes recently, and just how like the planetary burnout is aligned with our personal burnout in terms of how do we really engage. And I would imagine that those solutions, if we deconstruct it kind of the way the engineer tries to make a bridge, we can deconstruct those solutions into the smaller component parts, then we actually can see that we can engineer pretty incredible things. Humans can.
On a positive note, this is one of my children's books. It's called Bright New World. And in this, we look at the things that are the problems: food, energy, transport, how we design our cities, how we educate and include women and girls, how we treat our carbon sinks, our oceans, our rainforests. There's 12 things that we look at. But they're just things. They don't have to be bad. they're part of the problem, but now they can be part of the solution. And the great thing is we know how to do it. And the even better thing is we're already doing it. We know how to design regenerative energy systems. We're doing it. We know how to redesign regenerative food systems. We're doing it. We know how to redesign integrated transport systems. We're doing it. Every single thing in this book is actually happening. I'm telling the story to children. So I want them to get this sense that they can build this brighter world. And it's then not only, I use real examples, it's all based on real science, real entrepreneurs who are doing it. So we know exactly how to do this stuff. The last chapter is called Thinking Differently. Now that's the most challenging part of the book because it's what we've been talking about on this. How do we get ourselves to think differently? But I think if you know that it can be done, you're more likely to everything that the illustrations are big and bright and beautiful. Each section steps into the future. So we see what the world would look like with these redesigned energy systems, with these redesigned food systems, with an ocean that we've taken care of, so that you get this sense of, oh, we've done it. We came through that terrible scare and now we've made it. And then we work backwards. So where were we at? What did we do to change it? So how do we build a roadmap out of there? And obviously for children, the story has to be one of hope because they've landed at this time. But that's a story for all of us. And I think we all have a different gift. You know, mine, I hope, is storytelling. My books sound a lot brighter than I've sounded on this podcast. But we do have our own gift. And the thing is, just concentrate on the thing that you can do. I'm also a yogi. I'm a yoga teacher. You know, I get up every morning, I'm on my mat. And if that's all I can do that day is just work on myself and do my practice to help myself show up in the world in the best way as I can, that's enough. That would be it for the day. And somebody might have something else that they do. But if we all did that tiny little thing and didn't beat ourselves up because we didn't recycle our yogurt pot, or we drove to see a friend, or we flew somewhere, let's concentrate on what we can do. We're all trapped in a system that we have to do some of these things just to live, or we, you know, an extreme, you can go off grid, but just do the little thing that you can, because there's so many of us. I think humans are fundamentally really good species. I think we suffer from terrible leadership because I think the people within this system that are prepared to grab power are the people that are prepared to cause harm. Not everybody, but some. I think most of us want a way of living in harmony with each other and our planet. And I think the obvious failure of this system, though it's so terrible we have to get to that point, might be the very thing that we need to recognize collectively as a human family that those cheap little power grabs, which is what they are, don't really work, and that we'll go back to something that's a much more equitable way of being and balanced way of being with our life support system, because we don't really have the choice. We either do that or we're done.
First of all, thank you for speaking to what we're already doing, because there are incredible initiatives out there, incredible companies that are doing pioneering work. My brother-in-law, he was part of launching a company called Capture 6. And this company is one of the companies on the planet that right now is working on carbon sequestering and removing carbon from the atmosphere and putting it back into the earth. There's such innovative people out there that are not spending their lives trying to think about how they can accumulate their own personal stockpiles of stuff and wealth, but are actually spending their lives trying to figure out how we as a human species can redesign our relationship with the earth. And I want to uplift those people because there's so many, and it's beautiful to see that energy. There's a lot of energy around it. And we do get back to that idea of storytelling. We end up getting small slivers of these stories, right? And the slivers of the stories that we get are typically the dominant narrative that is controlled by the dominant few that are in the positions of holding the most wealth and the most access to power, the media, the news channels. And so those are the stories that typically we're hearing, but there's many more stories that need to be uplifted. And your story is one of them, which is why I invited you onto the podcast, because I feel like your story, your book, your work with Earthled Education, and really drawing out the hope of what's happening. I love how the book is talking about the things that are happening right now. You mentioned regenerative farming a couple of times. Could you tell people that might not be familiar with the word regenerative? Could you tell people what that means? And could you give us an example of something that's happening right now that we can like really just cheer on, like something that you know, some initiative, some regenerative initiative that you're excited about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of them is being on this podcast because I really think people are great, really. Most people are just bloody wonderful and they get through their day with kindness and they bring joy. And I think that is to be celebrated. There are incredible things happening. As you say, in human ingenuity, some people are really throwing their whole life energy at solving the big problems, but some people are tuning into podcasts like yours and they're listening and they're thinking, and that's enough. And being kind to each other and doing things in their daily lives. It's that spread an energy of kindness and positiveness, which is what I think we need to have to define against the fear sometimes that makes us retract and be violent or too fearful to live in a more generously spirited way. In terms of regenerative, or I'm going to use another word, which is called syntropic, which is basically everything in nature is syntropic. That comes from a word that's used a lot by Buckminster Fuller, who's a great systems thinker. Everything in nature, if you look at it, is designed to enhance the life of something else. That we do have parasites that feed off other things, but in the greater ecosystem is something that is nothing's wasted, nothing's thrown away. Everything is designed to strengthen something else in its ecosystem. If it means, it sounds terrible, but like if you take out an apex predator, then you'll have too many deer, for example, who will eat too much of the foliage. And so then the forest will collapse. So it might look awful that a jaguar has eaten or a cheetah has eaten a deer, but that's actually is working in the natural order. So if where we're going as humans, if you have all apex predators, the whole thing collapses. So things that are syntropic or regenerative are designed to mimic nature, or you can also call it, some people in other designs in architecture and tech will use biomimicry, where you're using things that are using nature as their archetype and are designed to enhance life. So while you have a company, a regenerative company, it's a company or a syntropic enterprise. It's a company that is in business, not just to do less bad, which is what you might call sustainability, but to be actively making the quality of life for its people by the product that it offers better. It's something that will help life to flourish rather than to detract from life. So if you are in a business, really, eventually, I believe all our businesses, or most of them, will be regenerative, because we can't have businesses that aren't, because they take out too much. And you are right, there's extraordinary people designing regenerative agriculture, regenerative buildings that generate their own, they're called living buildings, they generate their own heat, they generate their own water systems. There's absolute incredible things coming out of the pipeline, but probably most importantly of all, the concept that we can design things that way. And that is something for us to aspire to and learn. And when I'm talking about Earthled Education, you would learn how to design whatever it is that we do in a regenerative way. So that's at the heart of it, is learning how for us to build and design things in ways that enhance life as opposed to detract from it.
I love that. I mean, it feels so basic too to me. It's like what you take out, you have to put back in. You have to put it back in. You just can't keep taking and taking without also putting it back in. And part of regeneration and regenerative systems is recreating and biomimicking that cycle of waste, of recycling. And I mean, we're moving there. Of course, our recycling systems could be improved. There's a lot of recycling that doesn't really ever make it to the places it needs to. And at the same time, there's people that are slowly drawing out plastic from the oceans. There's people that are dedicating their lives to fishing plastic out of the ocean and turning it into something usable. So it's happening, actually. As we speak, it's happening. And that's what's inspiring, right? That's what's inspiring. It's like we are waking up, and that's part of the story that we can't forget and need to hold on to.
Absolutely, that we are waking up, and that most of us really want something that is life affirming. And I think that has its own power. It feels hard at the moment. It really does. But I think there's so much awakening that we have really good reason to hope.
I love that. And Cindy, I didn't know that you were a yogi. We're meeting for the first time here today. And at least talking for the first time today, but I love to hear that you have that practice and how important that practice is. I know to myself as well, that practice every morning, sitting on my cushion, getting quiet, listening. We talked about humility earlier together, about the human species, and kind of just like we have to slow down. I really think, and part of slowing down is creating some of that habit in our own personal lives. Like we're driven to do more and more and more. We're just driven to just consume more, consuming food, consuming clothes, consuming media, consuming movies. It's just like all we do is consume. We're driven to consume. And I just think it's really revolutionary to just sit and maybe think about, maybe there's a way for me to consume less. Maybe there's a little bit less for me to consume. And that in and of itself is quite remarkable. It's profound and it's actually life affirming, and it can create a lot of ease and space, and patience is a part of that practice for me. Every morning when I wake up and I practice, it's just reminding myself that sometimes less is more.
I think that's beautiful, Hawah. And I also want to say that my heart really goes out to people listening. You did use the word driven, and that can really feel like it. It feels so hard sometimes to know how to stop. And sometimes people feel that it is a luxury to be able to stop, because there's people with enough that it might be possible, but there's people who are doing 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet. And then when you do stop, you just you just go to sleep, or you're too tired and you just want something that will take you away from things. So I think my heart goes out to, if you're listening to this podcast, it's because you're trying to think about how we might do things differently on this earth. And so I just would say that you're already a really beautiful person who's probably doing more than enough, and just take care of yourself is the most important thing, because when your spirit's in good shape and you've taken time to care for yourself, then you probably have more time to spread that and to take care of other things. But the thing is, really don't put yourself under so much pressure that you feel it's your responsibility and that you have to do something and that you've done something wrong. It is a kind of long, slower journey, I think, to a place that we can find more collective balance. And it will come if we do take this time for self-care and a practice of being more considerate to ourselves and to the people around us. I think that creates that energy. But I spoke about some of the deep trauma, the systemic issues that we need to overcome, which doesn't mean that they're not there. But I think probably the most important practice is this one of caring for your spirit in the way that feels right for you. And that will be different at different times. There's spirits that will rise up and fight, and there's spirits that will do that sometimes and then go very quiet, and there's spirits that will always be quiet. But if they're caring for themselves and taking care of the people that they love around them, that's very important work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cindy, for rooting us into all of this important wisdom that you're sharing. I want to encourage listeners to be sure to check out the show notes. We have links to Cindy's books and her work. There's going to be some extra resources in there relating to some of the conversations that we referenced earlier in the show. Cindy, are there any final words, any ways that people can connect with you, any ways that you would love to guide people further along in their learning of this topic?
Well, thank you so much, Hawah. I mean, I'm just delighted to have been on this show. I think we can all learn from each other. I'm always happy to connect with people who are on this journey, because I think that's how we make each other stronger. And this is how we do build these new worlds, these brighter worlds that our hearts know are possible. So you're very welcome to reach out on the links that Hawah has suggested. I'm on LinkedIn. You can always find and message me there. I stay off social media because that's part of my self-care. But you can find me on LinkedIn. I'll be delighted to hear from you. If there's things that you've heard that you'd like to hear more about, I'll be happy to share that. And I'm sure if there's something that you want to share, as I say, we all learn from each other. Please do get in touch and share your own wisdom.
Yeah. And we'll have a link to your website, Planetary, in the show notes as well. Where can people find your book?
Bright New World is available in all bookshops and it's available online. So please just do Google it, Cindy Forde Bright New World. Hopefully it will show up. It's just gone out of the big bright hardback, unfortunately, has completely sold out, but they've brought it out in a smaller paperback format, which is less heavy to carry around. So there is a bright side to that as well. And it's a bit cheaper too.
Bright New World. I love that. Cindy, I love your work. I appreciate you so much. I feel like I could talk to you for days and days. I love it when the professor side of you comes out and you start dropping these words and I'm like, ooh, I need to write that down. I never heard that word before. So thank you for just inspiring so many people and the way you're educating and leaning into the spirit. It's just remarkable and inspiring. So thanks for taking time. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to our listeners. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you, Hawah. I'm really grateful to have been here and I'm grateful to everybody that tuned in and listened. Please go well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Everlutionary, Transforming and Healing the World is brought to you by me, Hawah Kasat. If you would like to find out more about my story, head to hawahkasat.com and visit social media where I'm active on Instagram, Substack, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Facebook. Be sure to share this podcast with a friend, and to make sure you don't miss any future episodes, hit that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thank you for listening. Stay in touch. Peace.